Welcome back to Beyond the Bench, the podcast for Mountain State's Legal Foundation, where we explore the cases, people, and principles shaping the fight for liberty in America. Today, we are joined by Randy Barnett, someone who I'm extremely excited to talk more to. He's also a leading constitutional scholar, a professor at Georgetown University Law Center, and one of the foremost voices in modern originalist thought. From arguing cases before the Supreme Court to advancing presumption of liberty, his work has helped shape how courts and Americans alike understand the Constitution. Now, with his upcoming book, Felony Review, he's turning his focus to the inner workings of the criminal justice system, challenging how felony laws are enforced and questioning whether they align with the Constitution's promise of liberty. Randy, it's great to have you, and thanks for joining us for a conversation.
Well, thank you for having me, Noah. I guess you told me before we started talking that you're also from Chicago. Is that correct?
That is correct. I'm a fellow Illinoisan.
And you said you were from the South Side.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I was actually...
Where on the South Side?
So I was actually born right off Michigan Ave. My dad raised me a Sox fan. And now my family has spent the last couple years in Springfield, Illinois, which surprisingly a lot of people don't know where that's at.
Well, it's where that's where Abraham Lincoln's home is.
That's correct.
And everybody goes to make a pilgrimage to visit Lincoln there if you grow up in Illinois. I grew up in Calumet City, Illinois, which is south suburb of Chicago, really culturally more part of Northwest Indiana, Hammond, East Chicago, Gary, the Mill community there. Well, my parents were both from the south side of Chicago. My mom grew up in Hyde Park. My dad grew up in South Shore. My dad had a business on 71st and Stony Island in South Shore, which I would go to work with him. My grandparents lived in Chicago, so I spent a lot of time in Chicago growing up. And it was my aspiration and my expectation I would live my whole life in Chicago. I didn't expect to ever move away. That's not the way things worked out. But when I became a criminal lawyer, which is why I went to law school, was to become a criminal lawyer, I was very, very excited that I got to be a criminal prosecutor in my hometown of Chicago, working for the Cook County State's Attorney's Office.
That's awesome. Yeah. And a lot of great culture, a lot of different people, a lot of diversity as well. And now you're getting the Bears over in what is that, Hammond, Indiana? I believe they're switching up.
Well, if it was in Hammond, it would be really close to where I grew up. I think it'll probably ultimately end up in Illinois. But the Hammond site, it's actually they had 3 sites announced. One of the sites, the Little Calumet River, ran through that site. It's not the one they're talking about now, but the Little Calumet River ran directly behind my house. And we played in this prairie behind our house, and we were always instructed not to get too close to the river because my parents were worried that we'd fall in or something. So when I saw the Little Calumet River on that plat, I thought, wow, that's the same Little Calumet River I grew up by.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. Chicago's just one of those cities you can always go back to and feel just an urge to explore. There's always a crevice, there's always a hole in the wall you haven't been to, and I love it. I love going back, and it's a pleasure to be speaking with a fellow Chicagoan.
So, what do you want to talk about?
Let's talk about your origin story. I want to get into it. I'm really curious. We're just going to keep it pretty straightforward. How did you originally get into the legal profession? You kind of touched on it a little bit, starting off in Chicago, being a prosecutor and a state's attorney. And really, what about growing up in Chicago influenced you the most to choose this sort of career?
Well, I'm a child of television, and so I watched a lot of TV. My mom just wanted to get me out of the house and play, but I like staying in the house and watching TV as much as I could. I still watch TV a lot. That's my prime recreation activity is watching quality TV, the prestige TV, as they say. But the television show came on when I was 10 years old. It was called The Defenders. It starred E.G. Marshall and Robert Reed as a father-son criminal defense team in New York. It was filmed on location in New York in black and white, very realistic, very gritty. And unlike Perry Mason, which we watched in our house every Sunday, which was really a show about solving murders, Perry Mason would always solve the murder. The Defenders was a show about practicing law, and the practice of criminal law in particular, and the ethical and other moral challenges that arose in the practice of criminal law. It was also extremely well performed. And it captured my imagination. It was from that moment on was what made me want to be a lawyer. And so when I went to Northwestern as an undergraduate, I ultimately discovered philosophy, thought maybe I would be a philosophy professor instead, but for various reasons, which I talk about in my last book, A Life for Liberty, I decided against that and stuck with plan A to become a lawyer. Then when I went to Harvard Law School, kind of all the incentives are kind of to push you away from doing that kind of work. My classmates would say, when I told them I wanted to be a prosecutor, they said, well, that's noble, but don't you think you'll be wasting your degree? Meaning, I'm not going to get a clerkship. I'm not going to work for a big law firm. I lack the prestige, lack the income. My starting salary as a Cook County State's Attorney was $15,000 a year. But I responded to them. I said, look, I went to law school to do what I want to do, not to do what I don't want to do. And that is one of my character strengths or flaws. And that is I really only like doing what I want to do. And it's hard to get me to do something I don't want to do. And being a criminal lawyer is what I wanted to do. And here's the bottom line. I got to do it. And it turns out that the reality of criminal justice is better than television can show you, until maybe The Wire. Wire comes the closest. And that's the theme of the book, better than TV. And that's what the reviewers of the book have said about it. Alan Dershowitz has a preface to the book saying this is like a reality TV show. Molly Hemingway says something similar. All the readers of the book, Jonathan Turley, Glenn Reynolds, they've all said something similar about the way the book reads. It reads like television, only better because it's the real deal.
That is correct. Yeah, I got to get a little sneak peek into it as well, and I love the balance of, the introduction to it. Almost feels like an anthology, but for crime. Everything is some are short, some are long, but some are really funny and some are really gritty and kind of in your face and almost a little gory. But, it's like a comedic relief snuck right in between to kind of give you that back to reality moment. But I love how you kind of touched on your love for television, for entertainment, and you even talked about the Defenders, which include the two Preston brothers, right? And I remember reading something about how you compared your career to movies like My Cousin Vinny or Anatomy of a Murder. So was there ever a personal moment in your life where you felt like you were in the experience, not just studying it?
Well, I went into the criminal justice system with exactly that mindset. I have an intellectual approach to things. I wanted to be a philosophy professor. I am a law professor now doing theory. But when I went into the criminal justice system, I resolved that I was going to be a real prosecutor. I wasn't going to be a dilettante. I wasn't going to be somebody who just came and went through the motions or was above it all. And so I set aside all my intellectual interests. I repressed them, so to speak, for at least 3 years, about 4 years I was there, so that I could really dedicate myself, throw myself, go all in. And I did go all in. And that's really what it takes to fully experience it. It's really been like nothing else in my life. It's 4 years of my life that sounds like 10 when you read about it, although the book is short. And as you say, the chapters are short. They're little bite-sized stories. But it was such a stimulating and provocative experience that I felt like I had to write it up as a book. These were originally some chapters of my memoir, A Life for Liberty, The Making of an American Originalist, that was published in 2024. That book got very long anyway, and these were like a digression from my career path from law school to being a constitutional law professor and scholar. What did this criminal justice thing have to do with that? So I spun it out into a separate book, and then I was able to blow it up because it's separate and add a bunch more stories, and also added a lot more information about the other people I was working with and against, what happened before and after the cases I worked on that I did research on to write this book. I didn't know some of the aftermath, and also was able to add lessons about the criminal justice system, and also lessons for people who might aspire to be lawyers and be in the criminal justice system. I was able to sprinkle lessons within the structure of the book so that you can actually have some takeaways from it as well.
I love that, and I love how you touched a little bit on your memoir, Life for Liberty, right? So you've done a lot of work, not just in the criminal justice system. You've done a lot of work in Constitution, in originalist theory, in libertarian and conservative influence and writing as well, and I feel like law can feel very abstract, and you even touch about how your father was not really a lawyer, but he would have been a great lawyer. You touched on that in your book. So is there something that is totally maybe non-legal that influences how you think about the Constitution?
Well, the overriding theme of my career, I discovered once I was sufficiently into it, was justice. This is what attracted me to criminal law, because when I saw on television were people whose job it was to see that justice was done. And that's turns out to be my motive, my prime motive for everything I do. The reason I was thinking about going to philosophy is because I discovered when I went to Northwestern, I didn't even hear about philosophy as an undergrad in Thornton Fractional North in Calumet City. I didn't even know what it was, never heard of it. When I got to Northwestern, I discovered philosophy. Somehow I managed to take an intro to philosophy class the second quarter. I don't even know why I took it. And I went, oh my God, this is a whole discipline about what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, what's justice. I had no idea that existed. That's why I thought maybe I'd be a professor of philosophy. But then I went back to being, plan A, to be a lawyer, and I thought, well, I could be a law professor, and all of my books are really about that. My first monograph is called The Structure of Liberty, Justice, and the Rule of Law. It's about what is justice and what is the rule of law, and the most recent book I'm working on is also about that, which we can talk about later. We don't want to get into that too soon. But that is the overriding theme. Now, when you're a prosecutor, when you're a criminal lawyer, you're trying to get just outcomes case by case. But your behavior, your practice doesn't affect the justice of the system as a whole. You have to take that as given. And in Chicago, that meant taking as given a pretty corrupt legal system that was defective in many ways. But when I moved to be a law professor, the reason why I made that move and the reason why I would not go back, because I think now I'm doing what I was sort of born to do. Other people can be prosecutors better than I could. I looked up to those people, but they can't do what I'm doing, which is trying to figure out what exactly justice is in a more abstract way, and then figure out how to make the system more just overall. And that's part of the reason why I got interested in constitutional law, something that turned me off completely as a law student, because I thought with the Supreme Court rulings going so far away from the Constitution had basically been a failed experiment. And it didn't work, so why should I pay it? If the Supreme Court's not going to take the Constitution seriously, why should I? But by the time I came back as a law professor, I realized, hey, look, they haven't repealed it. It's still there. The American people tend to like their Constitution, so let's work with that. And by working with the Constitution we already have, I think we can make the United States a more just place. And if the United States is more just, the whole world is going to be more just as well.
I agree, and I believe that you've done so much across your career. I mean, even from writing about it, and I mean, even arguing, right? Getting your hands dirty, being on the front line, and going to court yourself. And I kind of want to touch on that a little bit. So, in your memoir, Life for Liberty, you talk a lot about a case that was about limiting medical marijuana ownership, right? Gonzalez versus Reich, and where you were famously argued at the U.S. Supreme Court. What was that experience like, and what kind of mental and physical preparation goes into working a case at that kind of level?
Well, it was the most most anxiety I've ever experienced in my life. I was, really off my game for 6 weeks building up to that argument. What I observed at the time was, now I understand how people in high stress jobs get ulcers, because I had that acid in the pit of my stomach for like 6 weeks building up to the argument. And so it was frightening, to tell you the truth. Not something I even really want to do again. I had tried murder cases to juries, and that was high pressure. And I was able to do that. But when I started thinking about going into the Supreme Court and arguing the medical marijuana case in a high profile case, not all Supreme Court cases are high profile. This one was. This is what in a criminal justice system we would call a heater case, because there's heat on it. And with all the press attention during the 2 or 3 year buildup, I got involved in the medical marijuana litigation in like 1999, and I argued this case in 2004. So there was like a 4 or 5 year buildup in which I was bringing this case, arguing in the lower courts. Made my first appearance in a district court arguing this case. Then I went to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, where we won, and then we got to the Supreme Court. This was all new for me. I went to law school to be a trial lawyer. What it meant to me, being a lawyer meant trying cases to juries. It did not mean going into court and arguing the Constitution. So I had to completely reorient myself. And as I said, in the 6 weeks building up to the actual argument, I was beside myself with anxiety. The night before, my best friend, who was like with me the weekend before the argument, grilling me in the hotel room on the argument, we went out to dinner, and I said to him, if I'm as nervous tomorrow as I am today for the argument, as I am today, that's going to be very bad for our case. And he said, oh, you're going to be fine. Don't worry about it. So, okay. The next morning I woke up, and the morning of the argument, and I did feel fine. I did feel okay. Well, I thought, well, it's just, I'm at the hotel. I haven't got, when I get to the courthouse, when I get to the Supreme Court, then the building, then I'll get nervous. And I didn't. And then when I get to the lawyer's lounge, then I'm going to get nervous. And I didn't. When I get into the courtroom, then I walked into the courtroom. My family was all sitting in the second row of the Supreme Court, and the place is full. And, I had an edge, but it was a familiar edge. It was the edge I had when I got up in front of a jury in a murder case. It's not a normal feeling. You have adrenaline, but I wasn't beside myself with fear. So what changed? What happened? I think what happened was I was prepared. And preparation is one of the key morals that I think that all law students need to know about. Being prepared is the key to success as being a lawyer. And I felt prepared and I was ready. And it also made me feel a little bit better. I spoke second. We had one below. So the Solicitor General went first. The acting Solicitor General was Paul Clement, very famous Supreme Court litigator. And he got up, and when you sit at in front of the justices, you sit directly next to the podium, to the lectern. And so he was just right over here. And and he had his hand out, and I could see that his hand was shaking a little bit. Now, that's Paul Clement. He's had, how many arguments? I have one. I said, well, that made me feel better. If his hand was shaking a little bit, it was okay for me to be a little nervous. And when I got up, I actually stumbled over my first sentence. I had like 3 lines prepared, and I stumbled over the second one. If you listen to the oral argument on oyes.com or org, which you can if you want to hear the argument, you'll hear that. And my son later on told me, who was in there, when he heard me do that, he thought to himself, uh-oh. But then I write it, that was it. That was it. Once I got past that and I got in the flow, I was good to go. And how well I did or how poorly I did, I was good to go the whole time. And I think one sign that I was doing all right, and I did all right for a first time and the only time, is that if you're doing badly, the clock that's over the court moves extremely slow. It's like, why can't this thing be over? If you're doing well, the clock is going way too fast because you've got so much more you want to tell them and you want to have all the opportunities to tell them. And for me, the clock was moving fast, not slow. And so that was a sign things were going all right. Even though I had a very hot bench, they were very negative about my case. And the only people who questioned me were the people who ultimately voted against us. And the 3 votes we got from Chief Justice Rehnquist, Thomas, and O'Connor, Justice O'Connor never asked me anything. Justice Thomas at those days didn't ask questions, and Chief Justice Rehnquist was ill and not present. So I got no friendly, supportive questions that advocates enjoy, like getting at the Supreme Court. I got nothing but hostile questions from the rest of the bench, and nevertheless, I still think I held my own, and I'm okay with how I did.
Yeah, confidence comes with preparation, and I completely agree with that. And you talk about it a lot too, even in Felony Review. You talk about a funny story that resonated with me was, did I read him as a Miranda rights? Sometimes we get so caught up, in these high profile kind of heater moments, and then you even miss the details. But they always say the classic metaphor, the devil's in the details, right? And if you forget the details, it'll creep up.
Yeah, I'm happy to tell a few of the stories. There's so many stories that we can tell a few without giving away the whole book. But did I give him his Miranda rights? This was a night I spent hours taking confession from a guy who had murdered a Korean liquor store owner and severely injured his wife. It's a big, long story. It's very gruesome. And he was caught eventually, and I was taking his court-reported confession. He'd already confessed to me orally, but now I bring in a court reporter, and he gives me the confession in a court-reported statement. I get to the end of the court-reporter statement, and my standard practice was and I'm training somebody as to how to do this. This is somebody was shadowing me, a guy named James Lynn or Jimmy Lynn. And he was shadowing me, and so he went there, and he was in the room, and he was going to watch how I'm going to teach him how to do this. I get to the end of the confession, and I stop and I think, which is what I would do, because the nice thing about it, if it's not recorded and it's a transcript, you can stop and pause for as long as you want. It doesn't show up. So you think, what am I forgetting? What am I doing? And I'm thinking, did I give him his Miranda rights? Did I read him his Miranda rights? I think maybe. And so I whispered to Jimmy, I said, did I read him his Miranda rights? And he whispers back, I think you did. And I asked the detective who was there, did I? Oh, yeah, I'm sure you did. So I asked the court reporter, go back and look at your notes. Did I give him his Miranda rights? He goes, well, I'm sure you did, but I'll go look. Well, it turns out I didn't. Well, now what do I do? Well, first of all, why did I not do it? I didn't do it because the job of felony review, in part, apart from getting statements of witnesses and trying to get confessions, if possible, from those who are accused, we're trying to anticipate what a future defense attorney is going to say about the case. So if you were a trial lawyer and you're trying a case and you think, wow, if I was only in the police station, or if I was only back in the investigation and I could have done X, that would have prevented the defense from making this whole argument. I wish they had done that. Well, your job as a felony review assistant, we haven't even talked about what felony review is yet, which I should explain that when we're done with the story. The job as a felony review assistant is to anticipate what a defense attorney might do later and try to negate it. So what I was thinking was going to happen is this particular defendant was from Colombia and he spoke English. But I would think that I thought, well, I could expect them to say he doesn't speak English, and the confession was made up by the cops because he didn't really speak English or didn't understand English. So in order to negate that, I had a Spanish-speaking officer in the room where we took the confession, and instead of going to the Miranda rights, I started advising him that there is this officer here. If there's anything he doesn't understand about what I say, he can ask the officer for clarification. But by giving him that admonition, it threw me off my normal pattern, and I didn't give the Miranda rights. That's why I made the mistake. I was trying to be so careful, and then I ended up doing this thing. So I was like momentarily at a loss, and the guy I was training whispers in my ear, and he tells me what to do. And this is so thanks to him, I was able to fix it. And the truth is, I had given him his Miranda rights before the oral confession. So what I did is I retroactively Mirandized him. I said, before we had this conversation, Cesar, we had another talk, didn't we? Yes. And before that other talk, I advised you that you had a right to remain silent. Yes. And I advised you, and I went through each one of them. And then before that talk, and you understand that. So basically, I was able to go on the record saying he had been advised of his rights before the oral confession, which took place before the written confession, and there wasn't even a motion to suppress filed in that case because we had fixed it. I don't know that I would have thought to do that if James Lynn, the guy I was training, hadn't whispered in my ear. He went on to be a circuit court judge who just retired a couple years ago from the bench, and he ultimately ended up handling the one case in which Oprah was on a jury. And then the other case that involved, and I'm just drawing a blank on the guy who made up being attacked by MAGA people in Chicago. What was that guy's name?
Oh my gosh, I literally just read this part.
I know, it was just on the tip of my tongue,
Dilbert?
Right?
That's
no. Anyway,
yeah.
The audience will know who we're talking about, and we'll think of it later. But anyway, he was the trial judge in that case as well, after two other judges called in sick because they didn't want to handle that case. That was that TV guy. So anyway, thanks to Jim Lynn, who I just went on Amazon and saw has written a 5-star review of the book. So go on Amazon and you'll read Jimmy Lynn's review of my book, and he's the guy who was in the police station who saved my bacon after I messed that up. So let me tell about what felony review is.
Please.
It's the title of the book. It's a unit I spent 9 months of my 4 years as a prosecutor on. And it's a very unique unit. It's the reason I titled the book after it. It's like the original Innocence Project. There's an agreement that was reached between the Chicago Police Department and the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. These are two different units of government. The Chicago Police Department is the municipality of Chicago. The State's Attorney's Office is part of the county government. They don't relate to each other illegally, but they reached an agreement whereas no Chicago police could bring a criminal complaint, file a criminal complaint without the approval of a Cook County State's Attorney, which meant that there needed to be a 24-hour unit created of prosecutors who would respond to police stations to evaluate cases and sign off on them if they approved of them. And so that's the unit I was in. And when you were in that unit, you worked either a 12-hour day shift for 3 days, then you had 3 days off, then you did a 12-hour night shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., and you had an office in the area headquarters, and you had your own squad car, and you would respond to these cases that were throughout the city, day or night. And you would assist the police. You'd interview the victims. You interview the witnesses. You interview the cops. You interview the accused. And you decide whether charges should be brought. And we were not a pushover. We were not a rubber stamp for the police. Our unit had approximately a 60% approval rating. We would approve 60% of the charges the cops asked us about, rejected 40%. And every week we would turn in our logbooks and our approval rate would be monitored by our supervisors to make sure we were not being too tough or too forgiving. And as a result of that, innocent people, including cases I talk about in felony review, innocent people were let go in the police station because of felony review without ever having to hire a lawyer or going in front of a judge. We saved them. And I just think it's a remarkable unit. I actually don't know how common it is. I've never heard of it in any other city. I don't know if it exists elsewhere. I know it's path-breaking in Chicago, and it was the source of some of the more unbelievable stories that I was able to experience firsthand. One other thing about being on felony review that makes it different for prosecutors never get to talk to defendants because they're always represented by counsel by the time the prosecutor sees them. Whereas I got to talk to the accused, whether they became defendants or not, in the police station. And so I got a sense of who were the criminals, what the criminals were like, in a way that defense attorneys get to know, but prosecutors never get to know. And so that was another invaluable part of that experience that I talk about in felony review.
Yeah, and I love how you talk about Chicago being at the forefront, right? And especially the Department of Felony Review and how it was groundbreaking at the time, especially in the 70s and 80s, right? There's a lot of injustice and a lot of corruption going on at that time, and it's up and coming. So, and I'm curious, what's the biggest misconception Americans have about felony prosecutions?
What is the biggest misconception they have?
Or even a couple.
Well, what do you think? I mean, you've read the book. Give me something to go on. Give me a runway here.
So a big misconception, I think, I was,
because you read the book. So now, how did that correct your misconception?
yeah. So I mean, I didn't know that Chicago was, well. First off, I don't really know too much about the criminal history, let alone a lot of the corruption. But even state attorneys getting paid off. I mean, you think about, like a lot of people have a very negative stereotype of state attorneys. And back in the day, I mean, you were kind of right about it. You were talking about, there's money to be made and I'm here to make it, right? And when you're talking.
Well, let me just clarify. My father, who was a businessman on the South Side, was extremely cynical and realistic, I should say, about what politics were like in the city of Chicago, controlled by the Democratic machine, controlled by Richard Daley. And so I went into the system with my eyes wide open, expecting to see a corrupt system. I saw a corrupt system. It was actually less corrupt than I expected because I thought everything would be corrupt. And it turns out the prosecutor's office that I was in was not corrupt. I was very pleasantly surprised because that would have been harder for me to be around corruption within my own office. The corruption that we had was in the circuit court judges, some of the judges and cops and other court personnel. And so that's where the corruption really was, not in my office. The story that you're talking about had to do with a coworker of mine who was a prosecutor who was leaving the prosecutor's office, in my view, prematurely, because neither one of us had gotten to the felony trial courts yet. And when I asked him why he's leaving, there's so much more experience to gain, he said, well, Randy, there's a lot of money to be made out there, and I'm ready to make it. And then he went out and became a corrupt defense attorney. So that's the guy who was not corrupt when he was a prosecutor, but became a corrupt defense attorney, and as the book reveals at the end. So I name names in this book, and I'm able to name names in this book because every one of these guys were caught eventually. It's something that none of us thought would ever happen when it was happening, but it did happen.
Yeah, I feel like, especially when you're so young, in your career, it feels like they're untouchable, But it's good that
I have to say, one of the names I didn't name was him. I didn't name that guy. I gave him a different name, and the reason I did, first of all, it was always a good guy. He was a lot, I think. But this is 40 years later, 45 years later, whatever it is. And I was doing research on the book, and I looked him up, and it turns out, he's now a pretty successful real estate broker in Chicago. He lost his license to practice law as part of all this, but this is way in his past. And it's not like I really thought anybody in his life would read my book and connect the two up. But if anybody did, he's gone. He's from all appearances, he's had a very good life, and he's lived a good life. And there was no reason to remind people of this history that he's probably put well behind him. And so he's one of the very, very few people whose name I changed for the book.
So I'm curious to ask you this question as well. Do you think justice always finds a way?
I do not. Um, uh, it's an imperfect world. Justice does not always find a way. Um, so that's the short answer. I mean, it's our job to make it happen, and lots of times we fall down on the job. I mean, for example, there's wrong people who are wrongfully accused. Now, one of the questions I've been getting a lot of since the book came out, is did I ever prosecute anybody I thought we shouldn't have been prosecuted? And the answer is no. By the time a case got to me in a felony trial court, it had been through felony review, it had been through the preliminary hearing courts, and by the time it got to me, the evidence was there. And so, in 100% of the cases I tried or prosecuted, I believed the evidence was there to support guilt. I had no reason to disbelieve guilt. However, I know as a statistical matter, some of those people were likely innocent. I just didn't know who they were because the evidence was, there to show that they were guilty. And so I'm sure that innocent people have gone. I know innocent people have gone to jail. There is one example. I do give an example of when I was a law student, and we discovered somebody who was wrongfully accused had been in jail for a year. That was that. I tell that story in the book. But when does the criminal justice system fall down and innocent people go to jail? Typically, it's not because prosecutors are doing anything wrong, because, again, so far as we know, the person's guilty. It's typically because the defense attorney has not been competent. In almost every case of wrongful convictions, the original trial lawyer who tried the case did not do a very good job in holding the prosecution to its burden of proof, or in proving the defendant innocent, which is what I say in the book you have to do if you're innocent, and there's a reason for that. Even though there's a presumption of innocence, as a practical matter, if you really are innocent, you probably need to prove your innocence, and you need a lawyer who's capable of doing that. And it's when the adversary system breaks. The adversary system presupposes a competent lawyer on each side. And if one side's not competent, the system's going to fail. And almost every time you see wrongfully accused, the defense attorney in trial has been bad and has been incompetent or has been less than competent. And then the lawyers you see associated with those cases are their appellate lawyers, the lawyers that came in later and try to fix it, not the trial lawyers who messed it up. So, no, I don't think justice always finds the way. It's our job to see to it that justice finds a way. That involves prosecutors doing their job, and it involves defense attorneys doing their job. Without defense attorneys, justice would not find the way.
Perfectly said, and with a perfect bow on top as well. And you, I mean, this isn't even your first work, obviously, within just being an author. I mean, whether you're writing an article, whether you're writing a scholarly I guess edition, but also many other books. And I'm curious to ask, what are some mental or physical obstacles that you encountered while writing Felony Review, and how was the process of writing this book different from all of your other works?
Well, it's similar to Life for Liberty, which was both of those books were completely different than everything else. I mean, I basically do legal theory. My first book is The Structure of Liberty. It's a book about libertarianism. My second book was Restoring the Lost Constitution, about originalism. Then came our Republican Constitution, Restoring the Liberty and Sovereignty of We the People, about the role of judges. So, and then the original meaning of the 14th Amendment, a very deep dive into the history and origins of the 14th Amendment that was published by Harvard. That was my most recent book before my memoirs. Memoir writing is completely different, way more fun, but challenging. And what made it possible in my case is I'm a pack rat and I save things. I'm very sentimental, and I saved enormous boxes and quantities of papers and other sorts of things. I saved my felony review logs, for example, which I was able to get detailed descriptions of what I was doing on felony review night by night. And so I had enormous amounts of material to plow through and to try to digest and to turn into stories. And that proved to be, just a tremendous amount of fun. And, but, also there's stuff I got wrong. I mean, I had some of my recollections, it turns out, were not accurate. I researched them and found out I couldn't possibly be right about that. Anyway, it was fun. It was challenging. But I'll give you one example. When I was 12 years old, I debated in front of my entire junior high school student body, several hundred students, on behalf of Barry Goldwater, when he was running for president in 1964. this was a highly democratic town I grew up in, so I was definitely in the minority, as I usually am. And I have my debate notes in my own handwriting from when I was 12 years old, so I'm actually able to put in my summation at the end of the debate, word for word, because I know that's what I said. That's the level of paperwork that I had to go by when it came to writing this book. Now, when I wrote Felony Review, I did an awful lot of online searches for the persons that I was dealing with. So I would look at the backgrounds of the lawyers I was working with, the judges I was appearing before, what happened before and after the cases that I might not have known about. And I was able to flesh out the facts of these cases beyond what I actually knew at the time, thanks to the internet. I'm sure that I've made mistakes. I know of one mistake in particular that's at the end of the book. But I tried as hard as I could to keep it as factual and accurate as possible.
I love to hear. I mean, I couldn't imagine the amount of hours that went into going through all those logs, but I feel like it would be almost rewarding, to sift through those old stories and just kind of, relive it in even emotional states. But we are unfortunately nearing the end of our episode. However, before we go, I do want to add just kind of a little bit of a padding, for more of my own fun. But if you don't mind, we're going to do a quick rapid fire round to end things off. Would you be down for something like that?
We'll see how I do.
Are you ready? All right.
Yeah.
Prosecutor or professor, what shaped you more?
Professor.
Most underrated constitutional amendment?
Ninth Amendment. There's not even a hard one. Give me hard ones.
All right. Liberty or order, what's more often misunderstood?
The liberty and order are two sides of the same coin, and I mean that's what's misunderstood.
All right, Chicago style deep dish or New York thin crust?
Chicago thin crust.
Chicago
is
thin
my
crust.
favorite.
Okay.
People don't even know. I didn't even know that was a thing until I left Chicago, and all the pizza in the country was bad. And when my parents lived in Orange County, California, they opened up a Chicago pizza place, and I went there. It was just Chicago thin crust, and I went, yeah, that's what pizza's supposed to be like. There is a Chicago thin crust, and it's the best.
I'm gonna have to get that address from you and the title of that restaurant as well. But Cubs or White Sox?
I was a Sox fan growing up, but I don't like baseball. But I'm a huge Bears fan, so go Bears. Go Caleb. Go Caleb.
And then the last one, who are the Royal Knights?
The Royal Knights were the rock band that I founded when I was in junior high school into high school, and I played rhythm guitar. I was the front man doing the singing, and we were a really good band for the ages that we were playing. I have a picture in in a Life for Liberty. It makes me look like Buddy Holly. If I had only known who Buddy Holly was and what he looked like, I wouldn't have been so self-conscious about my horn-rimmed glasses. But I actually had a great Buddy Holly look going on, and I didn't even know it. But anyway, that was a very formative experience for me to be a rock and roll band. And in about 5 years before COVID, I actually took up the drums. And actually, if I can swing this over here, you can kind of see my
still got the rubber set.
Electric.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, there we go.
That's awesome, Mr. Barnett.
And I just came back from a week-long Flower Power cruise, a 60s rock band cruise, chartered, the 9th one we've been on out of Fort Lauderdale, run by Star. I just forgot the name of the production company. But Flower Power Cruise, it's a fantastic cruise, and it was basically it's a floating music festival for 7 days on the water. It's fantastic.
Wow, Mr. Barnett. You are a man of music, a man of many tales, and wow, it was a pleasure to even speak with you. But before we go, feel free to tell the people what you're up to and what you're working on.
Well, I'm currently working on a new book, and I'm well along in this new book. I've been thinking about it for years, but only working on it for the past year, called Freedom and Flourishing, Libertarianism for the Real World, and it's we're updating and reworking of what's called libertarianism as a political theory. It turns out I was very active in developing the theory of libertarianism when I was in law school. I was on the board of directors for the Center for Libertarian Studies. We published a libertarian journal called the Journal of Libertarian Studies. We had an annual Libertarian Scholars Conference. But that institution closed, and with it, went any sustained interest in the theory of libertarianism. And so libertarianism as a political theory has basically been frozen in amber for about 40 to 45 years. And things have happened since then. And it's really highly inadequate as a theory today. Right now, it's just a theory. It's really a system of policy positions. It's not really a theory at all. And so this is a work reconceiving of libertarianism for the real world, the world we live in the 21st century. I'm very excited about it. And I think it's something that will not only appeal to libertarians, it's aimed at conservatives as well, because conservatives themselves tend to lack any theory, which is how I became a libertarian. I was a conservative, but there was no theory of conservatism. I thought libertarianism was that. I now sort of think it is. This theory that I'm presenting is the libertarian core of conservatism. And if you take this real-world libertarianism theory, you're going to find, conservatives are going to find they need to deviate a whole lot less from libertarian first principles than they now think they do, given the misconceived approach to libertarianism that's prevalent. So I'm very excited about this. It's really what I'm thinking about now, and I'm hoping that I can do a series of presentations at places like Mountain States and all the other state public policy and litigation firms. I didn't do a book tour for Felony Review because I don't think book tours help much. I did doing podcasts instead. But I think for this book on libertarianism, I would like to take my case to all the public policy shops around the country and the public interest law shops around the country. I think they'd be a good audience, and it would be a way of enlightening them to this core view of what I think most of them already believe, but they don't have a book to explain it. And so that's what I'm working on now.
We would love to have you back. I'm just going to put that straight out there, and it was a pleasure to even speak with you and touch on your upcoming work as well. And if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to go check out Felony Review. It is a fantastic write. It is a fantastic read, and even for somebody who just started in law,
give it a 5-star review.
Yeah,
on Amazon.
I'll give it a Yelp review if that's what it takes. I believe more people need it. It's an excellent book, and if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe and follow Beyond the Bench wherever you get your podcasts, and visit mslegal.org, as well as check out Randy Barnett, really wherever you can find him on social media, as well as on his website, to learn more about how you can stand with us in defending the Constitution. My name is Noah Dansicow, joined by Randy Barnett, and we will see you next time to go Beyond the Bench.